Hey Daniel, it's good to see you.
Hey, very good to see you too.
Yeah, I'm
You're wearing a
pleased.
sweater in summer. What's up with that?
What's up with that? It's cold here, man. uh, I woke up and it's fall already. Totally skipped the back half of the summer. I don't know, weather's all over the place.
Well, it just came over to Europe. That's why it's gone over there.
Oh yeah, good. So it came to you. Yeah. You know, when I was in the snowboard industry in the ski business and all of that, uh, the crazy thing about it was there was always one region that didn't have snow.
hmm
So as a manufacturer of product selling in 14 countries all over the world, I was always trying to figure out, I mean, you never know what the weather's going to be, but we're always trying to figure out where should we move product around. If it
hmm
didn't sell in Western Europe, then, where can we move the product to somewhere else? And it was so interesting how, one part of the world would get absolutely no snow and the season would be ruined, and then somewhere else would just be getting completely dumped on. And it always reminded me, I mean, it's a pain in the ass and you can't really anticipate it in any way. But it was always interesting for me to be in the position where I can look at all of the markets and consider it as a whole versus, if I was just in Switzerland, if I was just in British Columbia, or somewhere where I had no other choice. And it gave me some perspective on the way I think about business as a whole, but maybe more poignantly, the way I think about life as a whole, which is that it's never just about the one place you are at. And that one situation we're in is never the whole story. It's just maybe our story. And it may be totally consuming, but it's actually never the whole story. And if
Yeah.
you can find a way to allow yourself to see, take a more macro kind of purview, then suddenly you start to think differently about things and you might come up with different solutions.
Yeah, I love that. It just goes back to what we talked about a second ago, which is kind of that universal balance. When you talk about there's no
Hmm.
snow, but there's too much snow, or almost, it's like that global balance. I
Yeah.
very much believe in that balance. It's like in everything, it doesn't matter what it is. There's always that balance, and Mother Nature, the universe, whatever you're gonna call it, is always kind of like there to balance things out. And it's
Hmm.
kind of like the same thing. And it's also in business. When you see yourself separate from everything else, then of course, you have limits to thinking and everything. But if you put yourself in context with the whole picture, the global picture, the big picture, then it's a
Hmm.
very different perspective. And it's kind of like with everything. It's like being in a situation where you think you're the only one in that situation, therefore are depressed. And then you look around and you go like, oh my God, everybody else in the
Yeah.
same situation. And now, the situation didn't change, but your
No,
perception of it changed. So therefore, your
it's
reaction to it
different.
changes, and your state is different.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, about that balance and everything, especially about the future, because
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
just talked about a second ago about global warming, and can you tell me the story again of your friend who's in what kind of industry is he in? The one with the
Uh,
proteins.
oh yeah. Well, I have a friend who's gotten very involved in industrial protein, and it's a very interesting idea because obviously the inputs needed for things like beef. I mean, this is an easy example. They're enormous, right? And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but if you aren't familiar with this idea already, you can easily imagine how a cow needs grass, right? A cow needs fields and fields of grass, and so the enormous inputs that go in to get a pound of beef, it's insane. The ratio is absolutely insane. But for something like bug protein, and there's various forms of it, it requires very, very little input. And so the ROI is through the roof. And the ability to produce in a very small concentrated area with very low energy input and all these other things, it changes the game completely. The difficulty with it overall is the perception.
Mm-hmm.
And when you break things down to a molecular level, there's different types of proteins, but essentially this stuff is great, and it's as good or better than a lot of the protein sources that we're using now. It's much more efficient, but we have a mental block about the idea of protein coming from bugs. So maybe we'd be willing to feed it to our dogs and our cats, but certainly we're not going to feed it to each other. At least not in North America and Europe.
Yeah.
Not readily.
Well, maybe I'm not sure about that. I mean, if you think about it, all the crap we're already eating, and we have no idea that it's, there's so much crap
Ooh,
in our food.
yeah.
Maybe bugs aren't so bad.
Yeah, it's all about, it's actually all marketing, really, and it's all packaging. Because, the United States recently passed a law, or whatever the procedure was, where they no longer have to label the contents of hamburger meat. And so if you walk into your average supermarket and buy, your whatever beef is on sale, whatever hamburger is on sale, it could come from 14 different places.
Oh, right, okay.
It's crazy, it's just insane. And there's so many pieces to this. So yeah, you're right. We're feeding ourselves absolute garbage. And not only are we feeding ourselves poisons and toxins and garbage, we're feeding ourselves things that we have no idea what the impact is at all. Because we're experimenting with all this stuff. And I don't want to get all political on it, but I think your point is well taken. We still have this perception, and even if it's just absolute marketing bullshit, we still have this idea that this thing looks good, feels good, it's endorsed, whether it's endorsed by a fake personality that never existed in the first place or not.
Yeah. You have a really good point there. It reminds me of a TED Talk that I seen from, it was actually at the Global Tech Conference, and there were two guys that had a startup, and what they did essentially is they repackaged food. So they just basically through chemistry, what they did is, they took, vegetables, and they perfectly reconstructed it to look like a hamburger. So you had a hamburger, it was the same consistency, felt the same way, it even tasted the same way. But it was like all green vegetables, even the bread and everything, even the cheese and everything. So it's kind of like it really comes down to packaging. It's crazy. But I think with today's technology and everything, I don't know if that's going to be such a big deal anymore in a couple of years.
I think we'll get there. I mean, we're creating proteins, we're growing protein in petri dishes. I mean, it doesn't have to be bugs. It's a big thing is perception and what we're talking about, and maybe over all of that, it's the way in which we influence each other. It's what we are willing to accept. It's what we're willing to believe in. It's the story, I think, that we believe we're a part of. And I don't know if this is a big leap or not. You said earlier, let's talk about the future a little bit. I think the future is predicated on the story that we tell ourselves. And you can try to predict it, and you can try to be ahead of the curve and all those things. But ultimately, it comes down to what we're willing to engage with. We influence each other. And there's people who are more influential than others. There's the leaders and the followers and all that kind of stuff. But society as a whole itself is a story.
Yeah.
Right? That adheres to certain kinds of constructs, beliefs and values. Because, I mean, beliefs and values are constructs as far as I'm concerned. And so it's what we buy into as a whole. It's a story we tell ourselves. And I don't think there's anything new here. Like, everything's been said. Everything's been written. You can come up with new variations on a theme and way to do it. And I feel like I'm wandering here a bit. But the question, what is the future, and what is the viability of a future, and what is sustainable, whether we're talking in terms of creating a business or creating just a life, it's what story are we willing to engage with? What story are we telling ourselves? What do we believe in, and what will we accept?
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I put that in context with my story. One of my stories is, there's a couple of them, but one of them, a lot of people are worried about global warming,
Mm.
I'm not really worried about global warming because we as humans, we are, we are inventors. We invent the future.
Hmm.
And, people are working on that, and maybe there's another real breakthrough. But it's the same thing with that. It's the same thing with cancer. It's the same thing with basically anything. It's even, the same thing with human extinction, whatever, you want to
Yeah.
call the problem. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I think we as humans we are inventors, and we create that future. And because of that, for every problem that comes up, we can create a future. And there's a great story that I just shared with you. In New York in the 1900s or so, they had a meeting because they tried to predict the future in New York, and there were so many horses around, and they basically predicted that in 20 years from that day, New
Hmm.
York will drown in horse manure. And
Drown.
yeah,
Drown in horse manure. Okay, yeah. Yeah,
drown in horse manure.
yeah. Awesome.
And then the car came around, but
Yeah.
nobody could even think of something like a car. Probably what they were thinking about is regulating, how many horses there are in New York. Maybe
Yeah.
using different food or whatever. And then the
Hmm.
car came around, and of course the car came around. Now we have different problems. I think the point really is that we always create that solution. We've always done that for thousands and
Yeah.
thousands of years.
I agree. Well, the solution is part of the story, right? So yeah, we as a species are persistent. We're kind of like cockroaches. And so if you believe in the intrinsic ingenuity of the human being, the ability to adapt, etc., then I think we're good. The difficult part of it is taking your ego out of the equation, because we want to know if I'm good, you're good, my friend is good, my son or my daughter, should I have one? That's so. This is all sort of egoistic. It's I thinking.
Hmm.
So it's back to that idea of what I think, macro versus micro. If
Hmm.
we're concentrated on ourselves, then the solutions become much less, they're not adaptable, right? We begin to fortify, we try to protect ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
We're building bomb shelters full of canned food and weapons, because we're afraid that someone's going to try to take our piece of it. And I think it's like the opposite of disruption. When we
Hmm.
talk about advancement and in the business world, it's really difficult to disrupt an industry or think differently when all you're seeing is yourself, because you're stuck in that paradigm.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
I totally agree. And
yeah.
the balance comes up again. That whole idea of the balance comes up again, because
Right.
one of the things I notice over and over again is when I talk to, I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to say that, but to young people. I'm 30 now, but
Dude,
still.
it's too late for you. Forget it.
But when I talk to people in their 20s, or when I talk to people who are 16 or 18 years old now,
Mm.
essentially teenagers, they see the world from a very different place that I see, or even
Of
that my
course.
parents see. I mean, it's insane. It's crazy. Like, I just talked to a friend of mine in Boulder, Colorado, and she has a son, and her son, is supposed to get a job now, and he said, okay, I'm gonna get a job. And 3 months later, nothing happened. And she, we talked, and she was like, I'm so worried. I don't know what's happening. And I was like, okay, how did you talk to him? And she basically said, I talked to him about the job and everything. And I'm like, I probably know what the problem is. Have you ever talked to him and said, what kind of cool project would you like to be involved in? And
Yeah.
just instead of saying what kind of job would you like to get,
Mm.
it's no, I don't know I don't know anybody between the age of 16 and 25 today who would actually want to get a job. It's like the most boring thing in the world to those
Right.
teenagers. It's so different. It's like we really get involved in projects, and they collaborate in a whole different way.
Of course.
So I think, like, when it comes to that, like, once again going back to the balance, I think that new
Mm.
generation is a lot less ego focused. They're a lot more collaborative?
I'm not going to agree with you. Yes, they're more collaborative. I'm not going to agree on the ego piece, but I would say that they're, in a generally speaking, at that age, we're much more experiential. And
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by that is we're in it for the experience
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as opposed for the end result, right? And that's a very typical, I mean, part of maturation. So your example is right on, like the story you just shared. Why would you thinking of a job? Because job entails like, okay, the rest of my life. Hey, I just want to have a good time right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 18 years old. I want to live my life, and that idea permeates, I think, the younger generations right now, where they understand that the experience really truly matters. So the idea of sacrifice and sort of these old ideals that previous generations had, where you grind away and you work your ass off and you do whatever it takes, so that later you get to have some enjoyment in your life and some retirement. These kids are like, no, screw that. I want to enjoy myself now. I want to have a good experience. It's not that they're not willing to work. So when you change the context, like you just said, when you talk about it in terms of what's a cool project,
Mm-hmm.
they'll apply themselves like crazy to that,
Yeah.
because it fits that idea of what experience are they going to have.
And
And
mm-hmm. No, sorry.
well, just simply, that's where collaboration comes in and all those
Yeah.
things. So these younger generations are really willing to collaborate and really willing to work hard if they see this as an experience that's good for them and the other people involved, because they
Mm-hmm.
want other people to have a good experience as well. Whereas previous generations were tended to be, I mean, this is all very general, more, me first,
Mm. Well,
you know.
the other thing that I also see is that a lot of the, younger generation, I don't even know what, if they're called millennials, or if I am a millennial, I have no idea what, the younger generation in
You
their
are.
20s, yeah, I guess I am, in their 20s, they care so much more about impact than just anything else. They want to do something that really matters. They want to do something that makes a difference. They want to start a movement. And you could look at it as good or bad. Basically we're doomed financially because they're never going to make money out of that. Or you could say, this is kind of like the future of where we need to go. Whatever kind of way you look at it, I think it's a great thing, because when it comes to the ego side, previous generations, I believe very much, have been brainwashed into this whole idea, get good grades, get a good job, so you get a good pension and everything. You can buy a house, you can buy a car. So it was all about you. It was all about your ego. It was all about feeding the ego. The grades are about the ego. The job is about the ego. The house is about the ego. The car is about the ego. Everything's about the ego. Everything's feeding the ego. But now it's a very different thing, because I very much believe that the world we have right now in employment is not going to be that way 10 years from now. It's going to be very, very different. It's going to be so much more entrepreneurial, and the whole system will be not based on big corporates. Big corporates will be there to sustain the whole system. But already now, today, innovation doesn't come from a big corporation. It comes from startups and new projects and new ideas and new people. But basically, it's I just see that the younger generation is really driving the whole workforce, the whole business world into a direction where it's much more entrepreneurial. And because of that, I very much believe that people are a lot less ego focused, because just from my experience working with a lot of executives, but also working with a lot of entrepreneurs, these are two different worlds. Corporate executives, many years. It's a lot about this is my place. I have to protect it. I have to fight for it and everything. Whereas the entrepreneurial spirit is much more, let's see who else we can work with. So that's just my point of view.
Yeah, again, I think the ego's fully accounted for. I mean, just look at the phenomenon of what we call social media, but really just is ubiquitous, right? I mean, it's the various platforms, they're all the same when it comes down to it. And what it is it's a form of yes, we're watching what everyone else is doing, but we're self-aggrandizing too. Like we're being famous in our we're getting more than our 15 minutes of fame. That Andy
Totally.
Warhol predicted. It's constant. It's like you are the star of your own movie, and these are the players that are in it with you. And the new platforms that we're using enable that. And so I think that ego is actually, like I said, it's fully accounted for. I don't think in any way the ego has been reduced. However, I absolutely agree with you about the collaborative nature, and I like to. It's kind of like this open source idea. What I heard when I heard you talking just a minute ago about this idea of like what the larger infrastructures or companies or corporations would be responsible for versus what the people are doing, and I think that's a kind of a good analogy. You need a certain amount of infrastructure to maintain distribution. If we're talking about physical products at the very least, right? But then if you open the API, if you allow people in to how it actually is used, then someone can own the infrastructure piece, and everyone else can play with how it's used.
Yeah.
And then within that, there's room for everybody.
Yeah.
And that I think that's a really interesting kind of way to look at this whole thing, and way to look at what the potential for the future is. So we have this disruptive technology, like things like Uber that come in, and I mean, in Toronto here, everyone's freaking out. The taxi companies are all getting together and they're trying to sue them and they're trying to shut it down because they're not willing to lose their old way of doing things.
Yeah.
Because there's few people that hold on to the power, in this case in the form of taxi permits and licenses. Obviously they don't want to give that up. But there could be a different way to do it. You could create, a company where you provide the infrastructure and the vehicles and all the rest of it, and then give up the driving piece and let Uber have it.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the taxi companies, I mean, that's what they're doing. Anyway,
No, I totally understand. And talking about that also in relation to the future, I also believe that in the future the big corporates will be needed less and less. Think about all the things. Think about all the companies in the world that just do one thing, which is logistics. It's insane how big the industry is of just moving pieces from A to B. And now, think about what's happening right now with 3D printers. You can now, you can print your own cup of coffee, including coffee, at home. You can print your own whatever. You can print your own, computers. I believe in the very near future. I mean, they're printing now, in biotech. They're printing organs. It's insane. It's crazy what's happening right now. So I believe in the future, just that industry will shrink so much because we have much lower need or much less need for transportation. We can just essentially that's kind of like I see it.
Yeah, this is a big can of worms because you're absolutely right. Like logistics is enormous, and I have a bit of knowledge about that industry, and it's insane. And if you look at that in the form of geopolitics, he who controls the seas controls the world. I mean that remains true. It used to be back in the days, when the British Navy was, everything it was, and Britain owned the world, ruled the world, and America as a superpower has taken that over. Yes, because those trade routes are so important, because we're moving stuff around constantly. So you bring up a good point. When we no longer need to move so much, I would argue though that all of that is a bit of a false. It's like a bubble, because we're moving stuff around that we don't actually need. It's a perceived need.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of interesting things that we could talk about in and about that idea. But I kind of want to go back to that macro piece and go, okay, but do we need to move stuff around in the first place? Do we need all these things? Do you need a 3D printer to make the coffee maker to make your coffee when, the best coffee I ever had was made in a sock?
Yeah.
There's no coffee maker. I mean, I wish I could remember the name right now, but the traditional way of making coffee in Costa Rica is like a little sock that hangs, on a hangs over the cup, and you put in your ground beans and you pour in your water and the cup's underneath, and that's the end of it. And it's better than everything. Granted, everyone has their own opinion and their own taste.
No, I totally get your point. I mean, it's there's so many things we don't need. Of course, I totally get that.
So doesn't it come back to experience and what experience you want and what story you want to tell and who you want to be, and like that's what the future is predicated on.
Mhm.
So, if you want to build a business that's nuts and bolts and about things, or if you want to be sure that you have a place in the future, so to speak, I think really the answer is you need to trust in your ability to adapt, to be creative, to use your cognitive skills and training to find a way to create value for you and other people with whatever you have. And you can train for it. I mean, you can get an education, you can get a degree, you can apprentice in a trade. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is how do you create value for people within the community you're in, with what resources exist there. And the predictability part of it, I don't know, I guess maybe I'm totally biased, but I feel like it's a bit of a fool's errand to try to say, okay, this is what's going to happen, and therefore we're going to build for it.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, I get that. I totally agree with that because that's the wrong way around. It's
Yeah,
like sitting in front of the fireplace and waiting for the fire to spark. It's kind of
right.
like it's the wrong way around. But it's kind of like we are. I very much believe if when we invent and build things
Hmm.
for the future, I think Henry Ford was probably not just trying to solve the horse manure problem, but the horse
Well,
manure problem went away because he invented the future, even though nobody knew they wanted the future of cars. And I
right.
think that's kind of like what great inventors and great visionaries do. They very often they invent the future that people don't even know they either need or want, but that
Hmm.
that is
Hmm.
essential for us as a human race to continue moving forward in the future.
Do you think people are actually, on the whole, I mean, speaking about the entrepreneurial community, because I'm
Mhm.
going to narrow this down a little bit, because you and I are involved in that
Mhm.
for fairly intensively. Do you see the kinds of projects that are really thinking along those terms, or do you see short-term stuff? Because I see is short-term stuff.
it's
I,
it's it's always a bit like a football game.
yeah.
It's like there's a couple of guys playing, and then there's thousands and thousands of people watching. And I think it's always the same. It's always that way.
Mm,
There's a
mm,
couple of people, only a handful probably, who are inventing the future in that big way. And then there's the middle ground where people build stuff and do things, and then there's the majority who are
okay.
just somewhere, but they're not inventing or even thinking of new things at all. So I
Yeah.
I, I always see it as a football game.
So it's hard. I don't want to judge any of this. I mean, everyone is where they're at.
Hmm.
If a friend lost a friend recently, and we had a very different outlook on the way the world works. And I was sort of reflecting on his life, as I knew it. And I was thinking, okay, and we have such different ideas. We had such different ideas about what was really important, or the way in which you live. And he subscribed to the point of view that you work hard, you make your money, you provide, and if you're lucky at the end, you get to enjoy it. And he lived his life that way, and
Hmm.
so it's done. It came and it went, and he completed his cycle, or whatever, however you want to put it. so for him that was correct. And it's not for me to say in any shape or form that isn't right, because for him it was. So in a way, I mean, maybe this is a shitty way to put it, but like, he won his game. He did it the way he believed in.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It wouldn't have worked for me. It doesn't work for me. I don't live my life that particular way.
Mm-hmm.
I take risks in ways that he wasn't comfortable with, and don't have security in the way that he wanted and he believed he needed. So it's a completely different outlook. So I don't want to judge one from the other. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, does it really matter?
I think it comes down to balance. I think it's
does it just
important.
balance itself out, and it doesn't matter if you do it your way and I do it my way? Who cares? Because amongst all of us, it balances out, and that's the way the world works. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is kind of like like everything is always balanced. So let's take the example of somebody who just cares about making money and nothing else. Ruthless,
Yeah.
completely ruthless. We need those people. That's just my point of view. And we need the same people who are ruthless with wanting to change the world and changing the world. Mm-hmm. And I believe we need all those balances, because it's like with black and white, with light and shadow. Yeah. One doesn't exist without the other.
Exactly.
It's impossible. It's the same thing here. And I think no matter, and there's a lot of bad stuff that happened over the past I don't know, 200 years in the world. I mean, some really, really seriously bad stuff. But at the end of the day, and that's maybe very unconventional thinking, but I very much believe that everything that happens has to happen because of that balance. Because no matter how bad something is, and maybe the badder, the worse something is, the more we learn from it.
Well, we're reactionary. Bottom line, we're reactionary. We're not proactive. I wish we were as a species.
In learning, certainly not, and in wisdom.
Yeah, we just are. So I think you make a good point. So then it comes back to, I was maybe getting lost a little bit, but I guess it comes back to, if we trust that we have the ability to create, to adapt, to pivot, whatever, the future isn't the problem.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Or isn't a problem. The future is the future. I mean, it doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
So why be fixated on it at all?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think so often we're too much fixated on the future instead of being fixated on ourselves, in terms of really knowing what we are supposed to create. Instead of trying to fix problems or do stuff like that.
That's so interesting. It's like, I mean, this is nothing new, and a million people have talked about it, but it's like we're absolutely consumed with either the future or the past, and very little of us are actually engaged with the present moment. And the entrepreneurs that I talk to, they're future oriented. The people I talk to about personal growth and development, which is part of my work because the two are ingrained. I mean, I don't believe there's real separation between life and business and work and all those things, tend to be fixated on the past with personal growth issues. What's holding them back literally is the past. But then, when they put their entrepreneurial hats on and they're, forward thinkers, they're thinking about the future. And the best opportunities over and over and over again, and I'm not saying you shouldn't get excited and predict and think forward. Absolutely, you want to. But the best opportunities are the ones that are right there.
Yeah.
The best money that most companies ever make is cost savings.
That's true. Yeah.
Or it's certainly the easiest and the fastest way to make a profit.
Of course. Yeah.
So. Yeah.
And the thing with that is, when it comes to cost saving, it's actually trying to fix the past.
Well, it's changing the habits, I think.
It is changing the habits, yes. But if you look at if you look at a company, any kind of company, if we think about past and future, the future is basically, okay, let's create something new that will make a profit. If we talk about profit, and then kind
Okay.
of the past is like, let's fix the problem because we created so many costs. Maybe we hired too many people. Maybe we did that. It's kind of
Mm.
like the same,
Yeah.
the
Okay. So we're back
context
to
is.
balance.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
maybe
Okay.
we're back to balance. Yeah.
So the theme
Yeah.
for today is balance. I feel a little bit like if I was listening to this conversation, I'd be all over the both of us be like, well, wait a second, because we're leaving huge holes all over the place. Um, but whatever, so be it.
No, I think the common theme that I really wanted to talk about with you is like the future essentially. Do we have
Yeah.
to worry about the future,
So
or
tell,
yeah?
well, tell me about your future then. What do you see coming up for you?
Well, that's kind of a tricky question, but I mean, it's a good question. I mean, for me, it's nothing that is like, this is the way it has to be. I mean,
Hmm.
it's sort of like the way I see my future is, as long as I'm creating, and
Yeah.
as long as I'm following, as long as I'm listening to to my gut or whatever you want to say, and as long as I create, and as long as I make connections with people, I'm good. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like the future that I see for myself, and not
Okay.
trying to um, I'm not trying to create certain things and be really fixated on on that kind of revenue or this house or
Hmm.
whatever. For me, it's more like as long as I stay on that path of creating and
Hmm.
learning, and you can call it iterating over and over again and adjusting based on what I learn, I'm good. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, can we just cut that for like? Can we cut it out from here quickly? I just need to open
Huh.
the door.
Okay.
I'll get back in a second.
Okay.
I locked out my fiance.
Nicely done.
Well done.
Um, okay, so you're talking about just making sure that you get to do what you do. And as long as as long as you feel enabled and empowered and capable, you're good.
Yeah, there's a great concept from Dan Sullivan called unique ability,
Hmm.
and I bring it up over and over again because that's kind of like what I'm talking about. Creating. There's certain things that I do best, and
Yeah.
as long as I stay within that and let other people do what they do best,
Yeah.
um, I'm good. Like that's at least one piece of the puzzle. And I think there are more, but that's kind of like that's one big piece of the puzzle. And then another
Hmm.
one is, as long as I stay true to who I'm most inspired by in terms of who I want to work with,
Hmm.
then I'm good as well. But so often, I just talked to a friend an hour ago, and I asked him, what can I support you with? And he was like, there's just one thing, just remind me every now and then that I stay on the path of actually doing what I want, and
Yeah.
not not on the path that I think makes sense.
Awesome.
So I mean that's really what I'm talking about. It's
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. You can call it be more of yourself, trust your intuition, whatever. It's kind of
Hmm.
like that's really what I'm talking about, because I
Hmm.
very much believe if you stay on that track and if you don't fool yourself, because we're really good at that, we're really good at fooling ourselves into
Oh yeah.
believing in certain things. As long as we stay on that path, I think then we're good. I mean, at least I'm talking about myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That really resonates with me. Dan Sullivan, co-founder of the Strategic Coach, that unique ability piece is a fundamental block. I mean, it's the cornerstone. I use it too. I have my own language for that idea, but I absolutely agree. Like this is the way I think of this is it's literally the way you go through the world and understanding what it is you do at the most fundamental level
Hmm.
is critical, because it allows you to look at it sort of context agnostic, right? You don't have to have a specific industry. You do what you do wherever you are, no matter where you get plopped down in the world. This is the way you do things.
Yeah.
The way you're wired. And so I think I absolutely have to know this about myself. And it is the core of the work I do with people I work with as well, because we can't solve problems till if we're just solving problems, it's just always you're on the hamster wheel,
Hmm.
right? You don't really make any real progress till you understand why you do things the way you do. I mean, why, we've talked about Simon Sinek's stuff. These are all different ways of expressing the same thing,
Yeah.
and doing that work and making sure that, and I think this is something you just pointed out, that you revisit it
Hmm.
regularly as well. Because, yeah, we get distracted or we get involved in the story. I myself, one of my things is I isolate myself. And as my coach Jessica Jenkins said to me just the other day, and she's spot on. She's like, Perry, if you don't have an adventure, you just start to constrict and retract and isolate yourself and slow down, and I start to lose my mojo.
Hmm.
And it doesn't need to be like some crazy, going to, whatever, scale the Himalayas. It doesn't have to be that kind of venture. It just has to be something that I'm curious and excited about and involved with. And I realized, um, sort of answering my own question a little bit here too, is that, well, I've been really engaged with people and I'm really happy with the work I'm doing, helping people figure this out for themselves. I haven't been pushing myself
Hmm.
the way I could be and can be. And I just decided the other day that I'm going to sell the boat. I'm
All
going to,
right.
I'm making a big change. It's time for something brand new. And I don't actually know what it is yet.
Okay.
But I'm stoked now. It's like, I've been
Yeah.
doing this for quite a while now. I love it. I mean, I have an amazing lifestyle, but my head and my heart right now are mostly in Costa Rica, and I've got a nice house there, and I want to work on it, and I'm really involved in the community, and here I am, 6 months away from it, thinking about that all the time. And I'm like, okay, well, I got to go. So yes, I'm coming back to Toronto next summer, but to what, I don't know. And it's
Mm.
kind of cool. It's like, wow,
It's exciting. It's
it's
new. It's
exciting. And
different. Yeah.
suddenly I have this new adventure that I'm embarking on where I don't really know what the destination
Yeah.
is.
I think that's another like source where our inventions come from and our creations. It's just that curiosity
Mm,
and also that need for change. We're
yeah.
very um, it's even within ourselves we're so super balanced. We need
Mm,
surprise as much as we need safety. We need
yeah.
so many things inside ourselves that are just the complete opposite of each other.
Well, we need catalysts, right? Like, this is the hero's journey, right?
Hmm.
That something happens that propels it into motion. We've talked about that before. And it can be very difficult to be our own catalyst.
Hmm.
So where does that motivation come from? Sometimes it's inspiration. This morning I got an email from an old colleague. I haven't talked to him in 20 years. And just totally out of the blue, and he's just launched a new project, and it's a really cool one. His name's Marco Piloto, and he and his daughter have started a company making, I think they're called hand rims, which is the rim outside the wheel on a wheelchair.
Hmm.
So what you're actually holding on to and pulling and pushing. And they're kind of crappy, most of the time. So he's made this incredible hand rim, that's really efficient and fits your hand properly and has the right ergonomics and everything. It's a brilliant idea. It's called Be Brave, Be Braver, BBRAVER.com, something like that.
Hmm.
Um, but I was so excited this morning because I woke up, you know, had my glass of water and lemon, walked the dog, and turned on the computer, and there was this email from a guy I really like that I haven't talked to forever, and he's just taken off on this whole new adventure, and he sent me a link to this really cool clip of a guy named Martin Ashton, who was a professional trials bike rider, like did the craziest tricks. He was super famous on YouTube for doing crazy shit on a bike, and then he broke his back.
Okay.
And here's this video of him back on a bike, in a special crafted bike, and all his friends around him, and they're, pushing him down the hill, and it's just like, wow. And why am I telling you this? Because here's this new adventure, starting all over again.
Yeah.
By two guys, and Marco, had an accident about 10 years ago that put him in a similar position. So it drove this new innovation. Mm-hmm. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure he sat around and licked his wounds for a while, but like when I know Marco from 20 years ago in the snowboard business, and he was an innovator and an entrepreneur. This is how the guy goes through the world. So, he breaks his back, his life changes, his body changes, everything about him is different, his whole world is different. But sure enough, here he comes again.
Yeah.
Doing what he does. And
yeah.
It's inspiring, it's exciting, it's just cool to see.
It is, and sometimes we need those, hitting rock bottom moments. Mm-hmm. Because I think there's a lot of innovations and inventions coming from people who hit rock bottom. Just the average entrepreneurial story. I was broke, sleeping on my couch, and then I had this epiphany, and then I built this awesome thing. So often, I was living on food stamps or whatever. It's like, or so many things that people hit rock bottom and then they come up with amazing things. So
necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how about we wrap this up?
Okay. Yeah, it's been kind of a.
It's good. I love these kind of conversations.
Yeah.
It's been a great talk.
Sure. Well, I'm excited today, myself, because I've been inspired by somebody I like, and it's reminded me that I think, as a summary from my point of view, that this really is an adventure, and we don't have to know the outcome, and that's cool. That's okay, and we can take solace or security and trust in knowing that we have inside of us what it takes to do what we do in the world. It's there already. Mm-hmm. And it's worth doing some work around that to understand it better, so that you can feel more secure, but know that it's there.
Yeah.
And in that way, I think it addresses a bit of this idea about the balance that we've been keep coming back to, that even internally that balance exists. Yeah. And if we have to, go out on a limb a little bit or not know what's coming next, we can balance that with the trust that we know that we have the ability to manage it.
Yeah.
And I think that applies personally, and I think it applies in business as well.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I mean, the kind of biggest lesson I learned from this conversation is that, inventing the future is awesome, but at the same time we have to pay attention that, everything is balanced and everything is, already by design balanced. And if it's unbalanced, it's getting back to balance just by design. And as long as we, follow our human nature of creating and, creating things, whatever things mean, but creating, as long as we are creating in that space of just being ourselves, whatever that means, just doing what we're best at, what we, love the most, whatever that is, I think then we're all good. Because then the rest is kind of like just sneaking in. Good, awesome, that was a great call.
Yeah, thanks, it was
Where
fun.
can people find you, Perry?
As usual, at perrygladstone.com, nice and easy. And you, Daniel Jordi, jordico.com, right?
jordico.com, exactly. Excellent. Good. Perry, thank
Cool.
you so much. I'm looking forward to the next call.
Likewise. All right, my friend. Talk soon.
Thanks. Bye.